Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Alicia, and I'm the producer of public programs at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in New York City. And tonight, in honor of the 80th anniversary of the USS Intrepid's commissioning, we are so thrilled to bring you a very exciting and very rare chance to go behind the scenes with us in an important area of our ship, the island, which you can see right behind me here. It's that tower that rises from the flight deck and that served as Intrepid's command center while it was in service. So, in just a bit, everyone, we will be joined by our curator of history and collections, Jessica Williams, who'll be walking us through the space. And if that wasn't enough, we also have with us tonight a former crew member who actually served on board Intrepid as an officer in the 1970s. So, he'll share what life was like working in the ship's operations department as a Combat Information Center watch officer and photo officer. Throughout the program, we invite you to put any questions or comments that you might have in the chat, and we will, of course, do our best to get to all of them. So before we jump into the program, though, everyone, tonight, a little bit more about the Intrepid Museum. If you're not already familiar, there it is. So our complex is located on the west side of Manhattan, floating right in the Hudson River. And our museum is housed inside of that, the historic World War II Essex-class aircraft carrier, the former USS Intrepid. So for some background, the keel of the ship, the very bottom of it, was actually laid in preparation for World War II on December 1st, 1941. And then, just 6 days later, on December 7th, Pearl Harbor was attacked. So that dragged the United States into the conflict. And what was estimated to take 3 years to build, it ended up taking just 17 months. Now, our ship has actually been in service for a while then. It began service in August of 1943. It was active throughout the World War II time and also through the Cold War. And it also played an important role during the space race as a prime recovery vessel for 2 NASA spacecraft that splashed down into the ocean after their missions. The Intrepid then went on to serve in the Vietnam War on 3 combat cruises from 1966 to 1968. And then a few years later, it was eventually decommissioned to later become a museum in 1982 after being saved from the scrapyard. Now, later, we, of course, have ourselves a museum. So last year, we celebrated 40 years as a museum, and our mission remains the same: to honor our heroes, educate the public, and inspire our youth. On site, we've got 28 military aircraft on display. We also have a British Airways Concorde. We have the NASA Space Shuttle Orbiter Enterprise, a Cold War-era nuclear missile submarine, the USS Growler, and of course, the National Historic Landmark itself, the aircraft carrier USS Intrepid, celebrating its 80th anniversary since its commissioning this year. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our special guest for this evening. So, we are going to be welcoming Jessica on here. So first off, we have Jessica Williams, our curator of history and collections here at the museum. She oversees the interpretation of the ship's 2 historic vessels, the aircraft carrier Intrepid and the submarine Growler, and develops long-term temporary and digital exhibitions. In addition, Jessica oversees the museum's collections department, guiding the development and the use of the museum's rich collection of artifacts, archives, and media and oral histories. Also joining us in just a little bit, later on tonight, you are going to see our former crew member, Joseph Speicher, who served as an officer from 1971 to 1973. He worked in the ship's operations department as a Combat Information Center watch officer and also a photo officer. So first off, though, we're going to hand it over to Jessica, who's down there on our flight deck right now. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and take it away, Jessica.
Thanks, Alicia, and hello, everybody. Welcome to the flight deck. You know, Intrepid sailed into all these different places, the Mediterranean, the Gulf of Tonkin, but tonight it feels more like a North Atlantic cruise. Who would have known it would be so cold out here at the end of March? But I'm glad that you're joining, hopefully from somewhere nice and warm. So we're going to go visit the island, which is behind me. But before we go into it, I just want to get everybody a little bit situated where we are and the island from the outside. So as I said, we're on the flight deck. The bow of the ship, the front of the ship is that direction. And that is where aircraft launched off the front of the ship. And so then the back of the aircraft would be the other way, or the aircraft carrier would be the other way, and that's where planes landed. And the island, as Alicia mentioned, is this tower-like structure behind me. So it was when the ship was in service, it was the only thing that really stood up from the flight deck like an island. And before we go in, I just want to point out a few of the places that we're going to look at today, and also just some other things that we're not going to have time to visit, but just so you can see what we've got here. So if you look up over that direction, toward the front of the island, there are 2 rows of glass windows. The one on top, it has a ribbon board next to it. That is the navigation bridge, and that is where we're going to go first. And then right below that, where the windows are painted black, that is the flag bridge. That's where we're going to go next. Other things on the island, well, inside the island, there were also radio rooms, there were some radar spaces, other things of that nature. Way around on the top of the island are various radar masts. Those were changed over the years. It's based on changing radar sets and things put on the ship. And then if we look towards the back of the island, some spaces that we're not going to get to today, there are some other glass windows there. The ones on top were primary flight control. So that was basically the air traffic control center for the ship. Below that is another glass box, and that was where somebody would film launchings and landings. There's also a signal bridge up there, lots of ladders and platforms for crew to move around. So that gives you a bit of a visual of what we've got here. And now we're going to walk up the stairs into the island, meet up with Joe, our former crew member, and start walking through some of these spaces. So we will catch you up there in just a minute.
All right. And as Jessica heads upstairs, just to kind of give you a little bit of a visual reference of what she's talking about with some of those changes over the years, on screen, you can see 2 images here from our collections. So the one on the left is actually what it looked like back during World War II. And then on the right, you've got it later during the Cold War in the 1960s. So today it actually looks just a tad different even from the one in the 60s. But you'll notice a few changes, and a lot of it has to do actually with technology. So first of all, as Jessica mentioned, there's different radar masts. Again, it makes a lot of sense given the upgrades in technology from the 40s.
Has something to...
But it also, it's not just communications equipment. On the left, you might notice that there are other things, these things called gun tubs. They look like little kind of bathtubs, little balconies that are lining the outside up there. And those are areas where men would take to their anti-aircraft guns to try to shoot down enemy aircraft flying overhead while at sea. And in the image on the left, you'll notice a lot more of them, right? So as time went on, most of them were removed because most of the anti-aircraft guns were just no longer effective against these new jet planes that were, zipping around overhead too. Another change you might notice is the overall, the island kind of looks a little bit smaller later on. It takes up a bit less space on the flight deck itself. And that is just to make more space available for operations out on the flight deck. So the jet planes also really changed the way that pilots were taking off and landing from Intrepid itself. So making more space available was really helpful in that regard. But all in all, the image on the right is kind of similar to how it looks today. Again, Intrepid was decommissioned in the 70s, with the exception of a few areas like the primary flight control area underneath there. And of course, things like vending machines and whatnot. So I'm going to hand it back over. It looks like we've made our way up here. And Jessica and Joe, go ahead and take it away.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Alicia. So let me introduce Joe Speicher, who served on board Intrepid.
Hi, I served on board Intrepid from 1971 to 73, just before it got decommissioned. And I'm a volunteer here as a former crew member. I'm one of the younger former crew members since I was on at the end of the active service of the ship. But welcome to the bridge. This is one of the exciting parts of the ship, especially now that there's no flight operations going on. But this is where the ship is controlled from. I don't know if you want to come inside.
Yeah, let's go in. Get out of the cold here.
This is the outer bridge, or the navigation bridge. We're at the captain's chair here. This bridge has a ceiling on it. When this ship was built in 1943, as all aircraft carriers, this was open. There was no roof here. So it was all open, and it was open to the elements, and it probably was a pretty tough place to work, especially in rough weather. But now it's nice and comfy. Actually, there's a heater in here now, so it's nice.
Good.
And the captain would sit here, and he had a big rearview mirror, so he could see planes landing, and he could see them taking off. He also had this TV, although I don't know when that got installed. I'm sure it wasn't here in 1943. But he had communications with every place in the ship, and he could just control it all from here. You could see some of the communications stuff around. I'll point out specific things as we get through them. But he also had indicators. So you could see the course, the speed, the wind direction, the wind speed. And you can see there was a lot of ashtrays. There was a lot of smoking, and there's a lot of coffee cups. There was a lot of coffee being drunk throughout the life of any old Navy ship, I think. But this was the control center, sort of. The captain or the officer of the deck would be here, and the officer of the deck, of course, wouldn't sit in the captain's chair. But the commands would be given inside, and we'll go inside soon to see, how the ship was actually steered and the engine room controlled. But out here, as we go along, we'll see lots of communication stuff, radar scopes. There's more TVs, and these will walk by some portholes that have slits in them that so they could be closed up in rough weather, especially when there was no roof here. So let's.
You were telling me before we were chatting about the interaction you had with one of the ships. For a funny story about one of the commanding officers from when you were on board involving a cake.
Yes, actually, I was a junior officer here, and there was a change of command. It was Captain Williams, who was a super nice guy, left the ship, and we were at a change of command ceremony. That's a formal thing for changes of commands. There's everybody gets in their dress whites, or at least dress whites in the summertime, and all the officers have swords, sort of just all tradition. And Navy is big on cakes. Actually, here at the museum, there was a big display just of Navy, big flat cakes with stuff written on them for whatever the occasion was. And I was standing next to Captain Williams, and he said, "Hey, Speicher, can I borrow your sword?" I gave him the sword, and he cut the cake ceremoniously, and then the chefs came along and made little pieces out of it. But he did the ceremony. His first cut, I took this. He gave me the sword back. I put it in the scabbard, icing and all, and it never got out of that scabbard again. When I tried a couple of years later, a lot of years later, it was just welded in there. But,
good Navy icing.
Yeah.
One thing before we went on, I wanted to mention that a lot of visitors, I think, are surprised that the captain was only in the position for just 1 year at a time.
Yeah. A lot of the captains rolled in and out, and there were some that were just really short positions, like they might have been between captains, and usually when the ship wasn't doing much exciting, maybe it was even in the yards, and a captain would leave, and there'd be sort of a stand-in captain. But captains, typically, after being the captain of an aircraft carrier, you're going to be an admiral. So, and there's a need for admirals, and so a captain would probably get a year, or maybe a little bit more, depending on operational schedule, of operating the aircraft carrier. If it was being repaired, as I said, there wouldn't be much going on, and that captain would probably be just a stand-in guy. But and so they roll through here pretty quickly because they're pretty important people. They're pretty high up there, and usually they become admirals when they leave being this commanding officer of an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, I mean, they've aviators, right? Commanded a squadron, usually commanded another big ship by the time they got to here.
They've done a lot, and they're just on their way up, and they're typically, my experience has been very nice guys, very people. They're very crew oriented and operationally oriented. Do your job well, and we'll do whatever we can for you guys. It was just nice working with these guys. It was nice working with everybody. It was just a nice, fun time. I had a good time here, as did most of the other people that we were with. It was great for some 20-year-olds to just be vacationing all these European places, and it was fun. It paid.
Yeah.
So
see the world.
It was very nice.
Big ship.
Yeah.
Well, should we walk around the rest of the bridge here? Make our way.
Walk around. We'll see a lot of communications things. This is it wasn't like you had a phone that you could dial, although you'll see some of those around here. But these communication things go specifically to one spot or one group of speakers. So if someone wanted to talk to a specific room, there were codes what the room was. Everybody sort of knew what the code numbers for that room were. You just push it down and you say something, and the speaker in for that group of rooms. So, some stuff went all over the ship, and some stuff just went to one place. So there's a lot of wires in the ship. You'll see in the ceiling, not quite here, but when we get inside, just wires and wires. They say there's 20,000 miles of wires on the ship, because if something broke, it was too difficult to try to find that wire, so they just replaced it. So there's a lot inside. But the captain could pretty much see everything that was going to affect the flight. With the airspeed and the ship speed, and big gyro compass repeater. We're getting a view of some of the wires. This is nothing compared to
Yeah.
And a radar scope. There would typically be a radar man up here watching this and talking to. There's a lot of communications. He'd be talking to like the lookouts and the people, other radar people. So there's a lot of radar. These are called radar repeaters. They all show the same thing. Typically, there's two different types: air and surface. This happens to be a surface one.
Continue our way.
We're going inside. We're going into the pilot house. On our way to the pilot house, you can see the navigation.
We're getting
This is the navigation.
All right, guys. So it looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. As you are probably aware, the Intrepid is completely covered in steel and the Wi-Fi reception could be a little spotty at times. So just hang on in there and they're going to try to reconnect and we will continue on with our tour. But some really cool stuff there, right? Also, I want to show you something that we didn't really get a chance to show you earlier. Check it out. Here is Joseph when he was younger and in service there on board the Intrepid. Doesn't look a day past that, does he? And then also something else kind of cool. That area that everyone that we met him up there, lining the side there. This is what it looked like back then as well. So a really great kind of lookout point for everyone to hang out outside, to be able to look out on the water and, see what's going out on the flight deck. Of course, the flight deck was a very dangerous location with all of the airplanes going on and off, but also just kind of a nice place to get outside and relax a little bit whenever they had a little bit of downtime. So hopefully we will be able to reconnect in just a minute or two, and we will get this tour back on the road again.
All right, I think hopefully we are back. Sorry for a little technical difficulties there. So we and in that time we moved from the navigator's chair, and we've now stepped inside the
pilot house. Here we are in the pilot house, where actually things are controlled. So here's the helm, which is a pretty important part of the ship. It's the steering wheel, and this is the actual steering wheel that drove the ship for 30 some years. And the helm would be manned by a helmsman who was a young sailor, typically pretty new, 18, 19 years old, and he would stand here for a 4-hour watch, and he would be told where to steer. He would be told right rudder, so many degrees, steady up on a certain course, and that's all he had to do. He didn't have to see outside. He just watched the compasses. There's 2 compasses here, 2 gyro compass repeaters, and there's a magnetic compass in the middle. There's true north. You always got to tie back into true north. And there's a rudder indicator that when he turns the wheel, the rudder is supposed to move, and when it moves where he wants it, the white needle will show where it is. And next to the helmsman, there would be another young sailor for a 4-hour watch at the lee helm, and the lee helm is the engine or telegraph, and it's just like the name. It's a telegraph, it's not a gas pedal and a brake. It tells the engine room what to do. So when the captain says, for example, head full speed, which is, I think it's only in the movies, starboard engines, when he moves them, there's a bell that goes off in the engine room that indicates that this has been moved. They have a similar device in the engine room that then brings up what is set up here. They then move their handle, and then that shows up here that they got the order, and they know what they're supposed to do. And things could get actually really precise, especially when they're underway replenishing, because what happens there is there will be an oiler or some sort of supply ship will be alongside, and that ship is supposed to just go straight. There's a preset course. There's a lot of discussion before something like that happens. And the aircraft carrier, oddly enough, is the ship that has to maneuver to get in place and stay in place. The supply ship is always going just straight, and the aircraft carrier. So it gets pretty precise, and way up here above the see 4 dials. Those are the revolutions, the propeller revolutions. So it gets pretty precise here under the you want each propeller to go. So it gets pretty complicated, and the navigators out there talking to these guys here, the helmsman and the lee helmsman. It's a very touchy situation. Usually when it's an experienced helmsman, out of there, and you can look in from the bridge. Uh, see where all the other ships were. And radar, the sound powered phones would be connected to radar guy. There'd be a combat information center where all the radar data comes in. There'd be radarmen down there. There's no longer radarmen; they're now operational specialists. But just really smart kids who were watching ships, and they could tell where they were going. And that's a whole other.
One question though, sorry to interrupt, but so this is the drawing on here is supposed to look like a World War II battle, just because Intrepid was involved in that. But I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what Intrepid was doing when you were on board in the 1970s.
When I was on board in the 1970s, I came on board in 1971. It was the wind down of the Vietnam War and the height of the Cold War. So there were a lot of aircraft carriers then, and this aircraft carrier had just come back from Vietnam. So it was then a CVA. All aircraft carriers are the designation, the letter designations are CVs. V is an air thing, C is a carrier, and it was an A for attack. So it had a lot of planes on here that had, could bomb and protect and surveillance stuff. So they changed it to a CVS, which is for anti-submarine warfare, or ASW. So it came back from Vietnam. It was converted to be used for anti-submarine warfare, and it was sent to the Atlantic. It came from the Pacific to the Atlantic, converted, and now its function is in the Atlantic. So there was also back at that time, as I understood it, a NATO requirement for 2 aircraft carriers to be in the Mediterranean. And so a lot of aircraft carriers were being used in Vietnam and of high tempo, so they were not only being used, but they were back being repaired and refitted. So there was a high demand for aircraft carriers. So Intrepid was sent to the Mediterranean, and that's where I got on her in Naples, Italy, and so sailed around the Mediterranean for at least a couple months. I forget how long exactly. That was a lot of fun, a lot of nice ports there. We had a good time there, just fulfilling the NATO requirements. And then I remember as we left the Mediterranean, we had to wait for another aircraft carrier to come and relieve us, because there was the requirement up through there. And then we went to the North Atlantic, where it was purely anti-submarine warfare. And there's a big Russian, Soviet then, submarine base in Murmansk, Alaska, up over the top of Finland. So it's up over the Arctic Circle. So we would go up there and try to find submarines, because in order for their submarines to get into the Atlantic, they had to leave Murmansk, come down over the top of Finland, and come down and get into the Atlantic, and then they would patrol off our Atlantic coast. So the whole idea was to know where every one of those was. So we would do that. The ship was set up to do that. It had the planes, some of which are here, to track submarines with magnetic probes up the back of the plane to find magnetic fields in the water. The helicopters would drop sonobuoys, a pattern of sonobuoys, and the submarine passed between them. You would get an idea of where the location was. That would all come back to the ship. There was a place downstairs, not in the island, called CIC Combat Information Center, and that's where I mostly worked. And the data would come back there. It was pretty exciting when you they get a sub. You could tell by the sound of the propellers what kind of sub. They probably could even tell which one it was, which Soviet sub it was. There was a lot of intelligence stuff going on, and so then tracked the submarine. And as the submarine came out and went into the Atlantic, they would turn it over to other monitoring systems like P3s. The Navy had a lot of P3s flying out of Greenland and Iceland, so that we would tell them where it was going, and they would take it from there. presume they watched it.
Yeah, I'm sure it's constantly everybody watching each other. So you're learning this down in CIC, and then you're communicating all this up here, right?
Yes. So what went on at CIC? One of the big things for just normal everyday operations at sea was surface plot, or monitoring where other ships were. And it's amazing out in the middle of the ocean, or stuff in smaller spaces like the North Sea, how many other ships come into view. So the idea was to monitor those. In CIC also, air was monitored. What the aircraft were. And the Russian planes really would fly over us and sort of zero on the ship about that. And then Russian submarines. This ship also has sonar, so there were always sonar then monitoring that and sending that data back to CIC. And then the captain was always kept informed. But any sort of contact with any sort of unknown, it would get sent up to the captain. And he would know what to do. But sometimes he would even go down to CIC just to see what was going on, or just to get the data earlier than
Yeah, and it speaks to how this space is so important. We started by talking about the helm and steering, but it's what are you doing with information? What is the ship's mission? How are things getting communicated throughout the ship?
Yeah.
Makes this, so your work happening in another part of the ship is really central to what's happening right here.
I'm not in a situation where to go, aircraft to send up to deal with. And one of the nice things about radar was that the radar on this ship could go out maybe 20 or 25 miles, but having the planes with the big bubble on top, that fly data, and that could look over very far. I don't know exactly how far, but at least 50 miles. And that data would get sent by CIC. So you could see what was around if those up.
Yeah.
So if there was any concern, we'd love to get that data.
Yeah, that's amazing.
To CIC, and then the captain is told, here's what the situation is. You come on to do.
Yeah, and funny because you started by saying steering doesn't need to see where they were going, right?
Oh.
And there are all these other things that are happening where it's gathered information beyond. I mean, the ship did have lookouts and things as well, but it's what can you find out around you that's beyond what you can, observe from this interior space.
Yeah, and it was so unique that the person here, the helmsman, everything on a ship is port and starboard. If you're walking around, you'd always say, I'm on the port side, I'm on the starboard side, I'm going for it. And but because there's a lot of discussion of port and starboard, but the helmsman, he could get confused if he were told about port or starboard. He's the only parties hands to him or refer to anything on the ship or any direction, right or left versus port.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, we'll continue on. I think we've covered all the things in here, so we're gonna.
Well, there's a general alarm, which there was some need for everybody to go to their battle station. Just one way does that, and a lot of communications with the ship and outside the ship. These are a lot of sound power phones.
Yeah.
A sound power phone is one where you get into it, your voice is converted into electrical impulses that go through the wires. So it's
Yeah, and there's so many backup forms of communication. So yeah, we're going to continue along our way.
We're going when we're at sea.
So let's see. So I guess we've made it into
Oh, sure.
the chart house now. Yeah. It's a bit of a challenge.
Team or old, it's called the RAN, pre-satellite stuff. So this would they're just listening devices, because around the world, from shore stations, there's radio signals sent out, and you would try to find a couple radio signals, and then where they intersected is where you are. You know, depending on your degree to them, your bearing to them. So this is pretty old stuff, but that's the way it was done. And there was celestial navigation. Actually, when I was on, the navigator would offer celestial navigation tips or classes.
Nice.
And you could come up here, and some nights would be better than others, and people would do it with the sextant. And as you pan around, this is a DRT, a dead reckoning tracer. And this thing, there would be a sheet of tissue paper, translucent, and there's a light that shines up, and it moves based upon the course and speed of the ship. So you could plot where the ship was going. First, you'd plot where you were, the intended course, which was the navigator's job. Like the captain would say, we're going here, get us there. And then the navigator would figure out what the best way to get there would be. It would get plotted here, and then the actual course and speed got fed in there. And then when they got good positions from the RAN or celestial, I don't know how often that was used, but then you would correct, because this machine does not take into account the currents or the wind. So the ship was always, such a big ship, it's always subject to wind and currents, especially the what's the current that comes up from the Gulf, and then it goes under Greenland and down. Anyway, it'll come to me. I gave a couple of lectures on it. Anyway, and the navigator had radar also, especially for when we got in close to shore. You know, he's looking for navigation aids, you know, lighthouses, buoys, and that kind of stuff. And so these guys were pretty important. A lot of charts in the chart room.
Yeah, just for every possible place where the ship was going to go. Yeah. It is. You mentioned this in passing, but it's good to note, I think, that it's different now, right, between satellites and GPS. So they had some electronic means of navigating, but you know, as you described, they're not perfectly tracking where you are. No.
I think that they would have so many double checks, and it was being done so often. Wherever a radio signal could come from, people were always checking. So they had a pretty good idea. I don't know how Chris Columbus did it, but it was. It's now. I know it's just all electronic. It's, you know, there's probably a couple phones on the bridge, and that's it. But,
yeah, it's true. Even, you know, we were looking at the helm before. That looks different on a carrier today as well.
Yeah, smaller wheel, and it's a different world now. But this all worked for a lot of years, you know, and it was successful. 22 of these, I think, were built or started to be built during World War II, and built quickly, and they did the job. And none of them actually sunk, which is quite a feat. You know?
Yeah, and that's, you know, it's another thing too in terms of the navigation, is that it's not just, I mean, obviously it's important to know where your ship is, but the pilots need to know where they are as well, so that they can get where they need to go and also come back. So that's really important. I want to point out one other thing in this space that often visitors ask about, which is behind you, which are these voice tubes here. We talked about forms of communication around the ship, right? And so this is a very, very low-tech way of talking to people.
And these are when all else fails. You know, typically, like if there was no power in the ship, and like wires were cut, or blown up or whatever. Yeah, yeah. This one, I think this one comes from. You can trace it.
Yep.
Yeah, down there. So, yeah, people used to joke around with them, order pizzas and stuff, but they never came. So,
Talking to the guy with the chart.
yeah, yeah. So, quartermasters are pretty sharp kids doing this. Watching where we are, plotting, and making sure that we got to where we were supposed to get on time. It got pretty precise. Like when they would say we're going to be into a port, it'd be like we're going to be in there at 8:42 tomorrow morning. Not 8:30, not 9 o'clock. It was 8:42, and we were there at 8:42, and they made sure that we got there then.
Yeah, we now I appreciate the quartermasters because they also kept the deck logs, right? The quartermaster's notebook where they were constantly writing down where the ship was, and we have copies of some of them now, so it's helpful.
Yeah,
I can see their names still, which is neat.
Yeah, and they would be standing behind where I was. There's a little table that sticks out, and that was their spot. So every course change got recorded. It also got recorded on this tracing paper.
So I think we have one more stop, which involves walking down some stairs. So while Joe and I traverse the ship, I think Alicia, we have a couple of photos of some other places on the island which we're not looking at from the collection. So you guys can check that out while we make our way stairs.
Okay.
That's right. All right. And yes, thank you once again, everyone, for bearing with us through some of our little technical difficulties earlier. Again, it is a ship that has armored steel all over it. So you never know sometimes with these. And, we did test it, but you never know. But as we was saying, let me show you some cool stuff here. So there are so many areas of the island that we are walking through right now. Of course, you can see as they're walking back out through, we were just looking at the pilot house. We were looking in the chart house. There's so many little nooks and crannies. So there's a couple of other areas of the island that we want to show you. For example, what you see on the image here that aren't actually part of our tour tonight, but also aren't open to the public either. So a little neat little sneak peek for you. What we're looking at here is called Pry Fly. It's primary flight control, and it essentially functioned as air traffic control for the aircraft carrier. So Jessica pointed out the location from outside of the island, the kind of the glass enclosed area. This is what the inside looks like. Again, not open to the public. The air boss was the officer in charge of all the air operations on the ship, as well as airborne aircraft that were within a few miles of the ship. So planes that maybe just took off, as well as ones that were coming in for landing. So that is what this space looked like. Also, here we can see the signal bridge. So this was the place where crew members would send and receive some visual signals. So signal flags are something that we talk about a lot on the ship. If you happen to come by, you might actually see there might be some signal flags up there too. These are, very brightly colored flags with different kind of symbols or codes on them. And it's a way that ships could visually communicate with one another. On the photo there, you can see actually Intrepid's bag on the right there, the flag bag rather, which isn't actually a bag, but so much as a rack. So it would hold a full set of these signal flags. And then the crew would also actually use flashing lights to send signals as well. Looks like they're back there. So let me go ahead and bring them back up here. All right, you guys are on again.
Great. So this looks sort of similar to the navigation bridge. We have now gone down one level in island.
So we're on the Admirals bridge. So-called the Admirals plot, the flag plot. All admirals and generals are flag officers, so that flag is interchangeable sort of with admiral with a flag officer. And this also didn't have a ceiling back in the day of the real sailors. It was pretty exposed to the elements. But the admiral's staff, what happens when the ship is going on some mission, depending on what the orders are. A lot of times an admiral will be on the ship. I think I read that there were 10 times that an admiral used this as his flagship. World War II obviously was the most important time, and they were on for months. Sometimes when I was on it, they would come on. An admiral and his staff would come on for 3 or 4 months, and then when that mission was over, whatever job it was, they would leave. But so they controlled the group of ships. The captain's bridge, the captain controlled the ship or managed the ship and all the airplanes and all of the people on it. The admiral was in charge of the group of ships. Rarely does an aircraft carrier go to sea without a couple other ships, even if it's just train. In the North Atlantic, there were a lot of destroyers around us. There were supply ships. So it's just not an easy thing to move these things. So the admiral speeds and the wind speeds and the compasses and a radar scope, and they could. His staff typically would monitor the ship or monitor the group, and they would be talking to them. When we go inside, you'll see there's a lot of communication stuff, so they could talk to all the other ships around and monitor them and manage them. So this was it was an important spot for the big picture, and that's what the admiral was paid the big bucks for.
Yes.
So, and you can see this is the nicest chair.
Oh, yeah.
So the captain had a nice chair, but the admiral had the nicest.
Seems fitting.
Yes. And this, we're calling the admirals, it's also called flag. Yeah, and his crew, he staff and an operations officer, and just a bunch of people. I guess in World War II, his staff could have been up to like 135 people, like 35 officers and 100 enlisted guys. But later on, what would happen actually is ship's company people would get assigned to the admiral's staff on occasion, so that the admiral didn't have to have, for example, a photo officer, which I was the ship's photo officer, so I would get assigned to the admiral's staff, temporary duty for while he was here, so he wouldn't have to ask the captain to have somebody take some pictures or something. He could go right to me. So it worked out pretty well. Just cut down on the chain of command.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Well, and that's an interesting thing to note, I think, because, as you said, the admiral is in charge of the group of ships, but it's still the captain's ship and the captain's crew, right? So it's not as if the admiral can just be telling everybody in the crew what to do, right?
Yeah.
There is still a way of, the chain of command when you're visiting.
And my experiences with the admirals, there were several admirals that came aboard when I was here. The admiral and the captain are pretty much on the same page. They're buddies, and one is higher than the other, but it's and the captain of the ship is probably going to be an admiral soon. So it's just a good working relationship, I think. But and it's probably makes the captain pretty comfortable that he's only got to worry about the ship. There's other people, the admiral staff, have to worry about everything else.
Yeah,
So
it is interesting to think about how they are. I mean, they're not peers, but I'm sure they've probably even encountered each other at other points in their careers because they've been climbing the ladder, right? Yeah.
I think it's a small world when you get up there.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, not a lot of them. But here, there's a similar chart that was upstairs. I shouldn't say upstairs, upper deck. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, 26 ships, and the same monitoring indicators here: the course, the speed, the wind. There's a air search radar here. There's a surface search behind me. We'll walk by that. This was in the early 70s. This was the latest, greatest. And if you could get a picture of inside, this has all been replaced by a phone. But this in theory would plot all the other ships. Data would come in from all the other ships and positions, whatever information they could get, whether it was from a lookout telling a radar guy, mark this as contact X or whatever, the data would get fed into there, and there were different color dots that would come up on tracing paper. And actually, they for a while they tried to have opaque charts. I'll pop on that if you were in close to land. But so this was the latest, greatest, and I think that evolved into an iPad or a phone. Yeah.
So many. One thing I think it's worth noting too is that you mentioned that there were just a handful of times there was an admiral on board, which meant that most of the time there wasn't an admiral on board. So how was the space used during those times?
Well, I talked a little bit about Combat Information Center. Part of Combat Information Center's job is to plot the surface picture, what's going on around the ship. And so this, if there weren't an admiral on here, it wouldn't happen all the time, but it happened pretty frequently. A crew from CIC would come up here, and radarmen would monitor the surface picture here. It was beneficial for a couple of reasons. There's no windows in CIC, so they could look outside, and it was nice. And it's not as hectic an environment as CIC is. It's dark in there. It's just a lot of data is pouring in there, and what's important, what's not important, which is the CIC watch officer's job to figure that out. But they would do surface plot from here, which was nice, and so it's transiting the ocean. It seemed to be. Well,
Yeah.
the admiral staff might still be on here, but the admiral's gone. He would fly home from Europe. So anyway, that's what it was used for a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense because it's got a lot of the same
And
things
you get out of
here.
the crowd and
Yeah.
CIC.
Take advantage of the space.
Yeah.
A crew member who was on board during the Vietnam War, so a little bit earlier than you were on, said that at some point they were using the space to have radio communications with pilots during that period.
I've heard it was pretty hectic in here.
Yeah.
When they were, flying, missions over Vietnam.
Yeah. It's interesting as far as the uses of space and how, again, all these things need to be coordinated and communicated and gathered so that you all could do what you needed to do out there.
Yeah, so the captain and the admiral could know what was going on and make decisions. Right behind here is the admiral's chief of staff's sea cabin.
Yeah.
Can't see it, and then behind that the admiral had a cabin, but it was not used often that I know of. But
More it's the having spaces where people can quickly, the admiral and the chief of staff and the commanding officer can quickly be where they can rest and come back. The navigator also has a space. He has it back there, but so that he's close to his guys, and especially I remember going through the English Channel at night, and fast. We had to be somewhere, and we were going fast, and it was foggy, not terribly foggy, but it was very obvious fog. And that was the most exciting CIC watch I ever stood, because there's so many contacts. There's just ships and boats, mostly small boats. But there's a lot of them. You just see like all these blips on the radar scope, and it was Captain Williams, who was just a nice guy, just saying we're doing fine. Just don't you guys worry. Just tell me what you see, but don't worry about it. Listen. But it was fun. That's great.
Yeah.
I think I think we're getting close to time, so we could talk forever about all these things. But if there's any questions that came in, Alicia, while we've been chatting, if there's anything that Joe or I can answer.
So, what's funny is we actually have a ton of people who are so excited. First of all, they're saying, thank you so much. Thank you for your service. And a lot of people actually who said that they served with you and they were so excited to see you on here as well, which is super cool. There is one question that came in, and it was back in the open bridge area. And the question is essentially, why was there, you said there was no roof in that area, and why was that the original plan for that space?
Well, it was still the bridge. It just didn't have a top. That's just the way they built them. People were tougher then.
Yeah.
I don't have any answer. I was in the 50s, so it wasn't long after World War II that they covered the bridges.
Yeah, I think that was just typical at the time. There was another part of the ship forward on the ship, something called the forecastle or the forecastle, that was where the anchor chains were, that also was open during World War II. And also the Navy realized that this was not the best plan because of the exposure to the weather. And so at the same time, that piece got closed in and the bridges got closed in with those glass glass roof and glass walls at an angle to help, mitigate the glare.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the same time that the angled deck got put on the ship. So there was a lot of modifications, and I can imagine if they asked anybody who worked on the bridge, what ideas might you have to improve this? They would say, yeah, covering. But I don't know why they didn't. Probably could. Well, all those old destroyers, World War II, they didn't have closed bridges. So it was, but they were all enclosed. When we were in the North Atlantic, there was a couple of destroyers with us, destroyer escorts, I think. And some of the waves, the swells, they would actually go under them, depending on where you were in the cycle, and you would watch them, just they're covered. So those guys would have been swimming if they had open bridges. But.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, I think, that just about concludes our program for tonight. So again, thank you so much to our curator of history, Jessica Williams, for the amazing tour, and also our former crew member, Joseph Speicher, for sharing all these amazing stories and reflections.
It was fun. It was fun then. It's fun now.
It's so great to be able to have you with us. Really, it's such a special experience, and just to hear, everything that you remember and experience there too. So thank you again so much.
You are welcome.
And also, thank you everyone tuning in tonight for joining us and sharing your questions and your comments too. If you've got any other questions, though, you think of something later tonight, no worries. Feel free to reach out to us through our website, intrepidmuseum.org, or also through any of our social media channels. Perhaps you're watching it on social media right now. As a reminder, too, our museum is open to the public 7 days a week with our new summer hours starting this Saturday from 10 to 6 p.m. So if you are in the area, come on by, check out the island in person, right there on site yourself. And also, if you're curious and you want to learn a little bit more about our collections and the ship itself, we encourage you to check out our online collections database. So this is something really cool we've been working on. You can explore our digital collections about Intrepid and the spaces and all these really neat artifacts that we have anytime by visiting intrepid.emuseum.org. Hold on, I'm going to pull it up for you so you can actually see it. Intrepid.emuseum.com. So you can go ahead and check that out. Really scroll through all the different cool things that we have there. Get up close and personal, see a bunch of these amazing photographs, and explore from home anytime you'd like. Also, if you enjoyed tonight's experience, we do, of course, want to remind you this is our 80th anniversary peek into just one of the many cool areas of our historic former USS Intrepid. We're going to be doing a couple more of these later on in the year, but we encourage you to consider making a gift to support its preservation and other historic artifacts in the museum's care as we continue to honor the past and inspire the future for many years to come. So you can do so by visiting support.intrepidmuseum.org. So once again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We hope you had a wonderful time exploring the island of the Intrepid, and we will see you next time. So have a great evening, everyone.